Hi everybody, this is Belinda from Belinda's Book Nook, and I'm here to do a book chat with you. I feel like this month is going really fast, and so I'm working, like I told you all, on my book journal, and we're making great progress. I just got through kind of writing my review, or almost done. I think I have like a little bit more I want to say regarding this book, but I need to return it to the library, and I wanted to make sure I did do a book chat on it because it's a very important book and I thought it was great. So we're going to talk about A Fool's Errand, Creating the National Museum of African American History and Culture in the Age of Bush, Obama, and Trump, by Lonnie G. Bunch III, who is the founding director. Oh my God, really good book. I have all these flags and I'm kind of disappointed because of the structure that I had I only had limited space to write my notes in here. And so I'm not going to be able to put all that stuff, and it's not my book. I have to bring it back to the library. So there's a little sadness in me. I may end up writing some of the notes on maybe an additional paper to keep here, just because I feel like I really want to kind of remember some of the things. But some of the things that I read this for nonfiction November. And I actually did finish this one in November. And I had intended on reading this companion with, what is the name of the other one I have? It's called, because it's kind of a coffee table book, Begin with the Past. And that is really talking about the architecture specifically, about the building and building of that, the creation of the building. And this is talking a little bit more about the history of the creation of this museum, as well as the obstacles faced when from conception all the way through to the launch of the opening of the museum. I thought this was a fantastic book. I think that he did a great job of mixing some history in with it as well. And one of the things that that I didn't know was that this has been something almost nearly 90 years since it was first proposed, and it finally came to fruition as legislation and then finally into a building. So, perseverance, a lot of sweat and tears and a lot of no's, but finally, this was created. One of the things that he mentioned in the book that I thought was really key and also, telling, is that when they were trying to present to, just the concept for the museum, there was this pushback, and a lot of it was, well, why? And why does it have to be a separate museum? Why, and so I think that that was good for him to put in there, because I think sometimes people come up with an idea and they face some obstacles, but not those type of logistical things. Like, it's like, what do you mean? Because even in the question, it's kind of loaded that there isn't enough history to have a presence in a bigger sense. I know one of the things that he noted in there also was that the Smithsonian had a lot of pushback in terms of they didn't want it to be separate from the museum. They wanted it to be potentially a wing, which is extremely insulting, that the history could be contained within a wing. And it also just talks about the shift in terms of how we look at history. I know there's a lot of strife right now in terms of how we are presenting history now and how it's evolving. And I think that if you want to kind of push slavery into the corner as if it wasn't the central thing going on and the foundation of the building of the country and the economy, then if you want to do that, then you would think it would be logical to just have a wing. But when you really shift the way that you think about it and realize where the foundation was built, then you start to see, okay, that's really not possible. I mean, where would you begin? So he talked about that. He talked about also the struggles of getting funding, really some instances where it was just it was just wrong. Some of the people that how they approached and rejected, providing funding for this museum, and he had to do a lot of things that you just don't necessarily think about once you think, well, okay, they've secured some level of funding from the government, or they've got this grant. You don't realize how much. So he was very involved with a lot of that process. He talked also about like the politics of the staffing, trying to keep it diverse and trying to make sure that it was represented in a proper way. There's all these things that one might not necessarily think of as initially as something that is requires a lot more effort. Let's see. Another thing that he mentioned that I thought was really going almost on to what I was saying before is, he had gone to this interview, and one of the reporters said to him, the most common questions that he got was, why a separate museum, and why does slavery still matter? So I'm going to read, because I kind of wrote down what he said, because I just thought it was really well said, and in his response. So his response was, it's not simply a Black museum for the African American community. Rather, it's a museum that helps all Americans, regardless of race, to understand how much the African American experience is embedded in America's identity, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He also explained that slavery was the cornerstone of America's economic growth, political discourse, culture, and foreign policy. As a country, we cannot fully understand ourselves without embracing the nation's independency with slavery. And that kind of goes to what I was talking about before. And I think that it was really great for him to include that, because that's kind of still a lot of the mentality and the mindset of people that don't understand why. And I think when you call it an African American History Museum, it can also create that initial barrier or thought that people might think that they shouldn't, or that this isn't for us, when in fact, it is. It is a museum for everybody. I think that when we talk about, and this is what my, throughout the whole year and a lot of my reading, how powerful words are in naming. And so if you call something an African American History Museum, right? Well, then people think that that's only for African Americans, right? And it's not. It got the focus on that, but it's history. And that's where, you get into that whole argument of history versus Black history. Well, is Black history, when you're talking about in the United States, it's American history. But when you pull it out from that, then I feel like there's often a lack of everybody embracing it, and that there is a less urgency to read that if you're not African American. And so you end up with the same thing that we're at now, where we have a lot of people that don't know some of that history, including African Americans. But I think that the naming is really, really critical. And so I think, he nailed it really great in terms of response. But I think that it's just something that we all have to really, really think about how we respond to the naming of something, or what we label something. One of the books that I read that I want to definitely do also a book chat on, Butterfly, talking about this Syrian girl who, fled basically a war and death in Syria and ended up in Germany. And the whole concept of her becoming then a refugee. So that was the term that was, or a label that was attached to her from that point forward. And I definitely want to hone in on that in that discussion, not in this one. But it's just, to me, when I think about books that I've read throughout this year and thinking about labeling and naming and how that impacts people's response to things. It's really interesting. It's something I kind of like deep diving into, and I keep revisiting, and my position continues to be refined as well. And that's the beauty of books, right? So there's other flags in here, but I don't want to take up a lot of time. I just know that this book really, really was great. One thing also that's surprising that I didn't know is that the Bushes, George W. Bush and Laura Bush, were very vital to supporting this museum, and went above and beyond, particularly at the end, where they there's, I guess, some type of funding that the White House gets, and they take that, and it usually goes to charitable things. Well, she donated more than half of that total thing to this museum. She also, was very, very engaged and involved with the process, and later became a board member for the museum. So it was something that was definitely dear to their heart. And I didn't know that prior to this, so it was really interesting. The other thing he mentioned in here, just in closing, that I thought was striking, was that Barack Obama was president when they opened the museum, and he continued when he became president to fund and help and support the museum. But the author of this book, and I think I agree that that's possibly, when Obama was president, he had to do a fine balance of what he did to support causes that were, because that would be a contradiction of what I just said, but like, because it's called the African American History Museum, or I always say it that, National Museum of African American History and Culture, he wasn't as vocal in his support for all of the creations, even though behind the scenes he was as supportive financially and helping with everything else. But I think that because he had the obstacle of being a Black president, he didn't want to be seen, and this is how Lonnie Bunch puts it, he didn't want to be seen as the Black president, promoting a Black museum, as opposed to, it was easier for the Bushes because they weren't, so they could freely show their support without possible judgment. And I think that was an interesting thing that he put in here in the book, of kind of a conundrum, So I think it's great. If you get a chance to read it, I can't wait to go see it. I don't know when. I'm kind of waiting for all of this Omicron, Delta, and all these things to get past us so that I can experience the museum, because it's going to be probably a week-long process of kind of going and seeing the different exhibits and stuff. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. I am going to still try to get to the other coffee table book, because I still have it in here, and I want to be able to have this fresh in my mind when I'm reading that. So when I write down my thoughts, so I'm hopefully, if I don't finish it this month, I will tackle it next month. But great book, and now I can take my flags out and return it to the library, because I know somebody else can read it now. But I wanted to jump in and do this with you guys beforehand. Another thing is, I can see that my camera is tipped, so I'm going to apologize if it's really tipped. It looks like it's tipped this way. I could have just leaned this way, I guess, and then everything might look okay. These are things that I'm thinking about while I'm talking to you all. I'm like, the camera is tipped, and I'm not starting over. So I apologize if I look a little shifted to the side. It's actually gone this way, so I'm sorry. But check it out if you get a chance. It's a great one to read. I think he did a great job of talking about the different aspects of, what do you do? How do you determine what you're going to put in terms of a collection? I mean, even that, it's just, you start off thinking, okay, I want to include this, and then it's like, okay, but it's just so complex, and it's very challenging, and then you have to come up with funding to support the collections. So it's fascinating, and I can't wait to see it. I think I'm going to appreciate it so much more because I read the book, And I think I'm going to totally appreciate the architect even more than I do anyway when I read the other book. And I think that's another great thing about having a book and being able to read it before I actually go there. So I hope you guys have a great day. Keep reading. I'm talking super fast because I don't want to take up too much time. I'm still keep working on this so that I can get you guys a video of this next month. I hope you're doing well, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.